in the grand halls of the Amati mansion, where chandeliers glittered like 1,000 diamonds and polished marble floors whispered wealth, a young maid named Amara swept silently, her bare feet careful not to disturb the silence of opulence. She had served there for 2 years, working from dawn to dusk, scrubbing, dusting, and tending to tasks no one else dared to touch. Yet her presence was barely acknowledged. She was like the air in the room, necessary but invisible. But one fateful evening, the mistress of the house, a woman of sharp tongue and colder heart, accused Amara of stealing a bracelet that had gone missing. The other maids kept their heads down, unwilling to speak in her defense, for fear of losing their fragile positions. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as the lady's words cut her down in front of everyone, her voice echoing through the marble halls. "You ungrateful wretch! After all this house has done for you, you dare to steal from me? Take your rags and get out. I never want to see you here again." The humiliation stung more than the accusation. Amara tried to speak, her lips trembling, but no words formed. She had no power, no family to defend her, no coin to her name. With tears clouding her vision, she gathered a small bundle of belongings, a threadbare scarf, a faded photograph of her late mother, and a book she could barely read, and stepped out the gates of the mansion where she had slaved for years, discarded like trash. The night was unforgiving. The sky threatened rain, and the streets of Lagos, bustling by day, were cold and merciless by night. She wandered aimlessly, hunger gnawing at her belly, humiliation burning her soul. She found a bench under a dying streetlight and sank onto it, clutching her scarf around her shoulders. The city seemed to mock her despair with its blaring horns, neon lights, and people who walked past her as though she didn't exist. It was there, in the pit of her hopelessness, that fate chose to intervene. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom slowed near the curb, its polished body reflecting the flickering streetlight. The tinted window lowered, and the driver, in a crisp uniform, stepped out. He was followed by a tall man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding without effort. His shoes alone gleamed with a richness that could feed Amara for a year. The man's gaze fell upon her, not with disdain, but with curiosity. His eyes were sharp, yet kind, the kind of eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. He spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. "Why is a girl like you sitting here alone at this hour?" Amara froze, clutching her scarf tighter. She wanted to hide, to vanish, yet something in his tone felt different. Gentle, probing, almost protective. She lowered her eyes, ashamed of her appearance, her torn dress, her swollen eyes from crying. I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man studied her for a moment, then motioned to his driver. "Bring her something warm." Within minutes, she was handed a cup of steaming tea and a small box of food. The smell made her dizzy with hunger, and though she tried to resist looking desperate, her trembling hands gave her away. She ate slowly, each bite a reminder of the emptiness she had endured. The man watched her silently, his expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, their eyes met, and he smiled faintly. "My name is Damien," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of someone used to being recognized. She swallowed hard, realizing she had seen his face before. Damien Okeke, the billionaire philanthropist whose empire stretched across oil, real estate, and technology. His name was spoken in hushed tones, often with envy or admiration. What was a man like him doing here, stopping for someone like her? "I'm Amara," she managed, her voice cracking. "Amara," he repeated, as though testing the strength of her name. "Tell me, what happened to you?" Her heart thudded painfully. Should she reveal the shame of being cast out, accused of theft? She hesitated, but something about his presence drew honesty from her. She told him, in halting words, of the false accusation, of the humiliation, of the cold dismissal from the house she had given years of service. Damien listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his silence deeper than any comfort. When she finished, her eyes brimmed with tears once more. "They said I was worthless," she murmured, her hands trembling as she clenched her scarf. Maybe they were right. At that, Damien's eyes darkened. He leaned forward, his voice firm, resonant. "No one who has endured what you've endured is worthless." You are not defined by their cruelty. Remember this, Amara. Diamonds are formed under the greatest pressure, and so are the strongest souls. The word struck her like fire against ice. For the first time in days, her chest loosened, as though a knot had been untied. He rose to his feet, extending a hand toward her. "Come," he said. "Tonight, you don't sleep on this bench. I'll see to it that you're safe." Her eyes widened in disbelief. A part of her screamed to refuse, to run from the sudden twist of fate. Yet another part, weary and broken, longed for the warmth of his words. Her trembling hand reached for his, and in that moment, a silent promise was born between two worlds that should never have collided. As she stepped into the Rolls-Royce, her heart pounded with both fear and hope. She had no idea where this journey would lead her, or how this stranger's kindness would alter the course of her destiny. All she knew was that life, would it cast her out with merciless cruelty, had suddenly opened a door to something she could never have imagined. The car glided through the glowing city, and Amara pressed her face to glass, the lights blurring with her unshed tears. Damien sat beside her, silent but observant, as though studying fragility and resilience within her. And deep within Amara's heart, a voice whispered, perhaps this was not the end, but the beginning. C1. The car moved smoothly through the busy streets, its tinted windows shutting out the noise and chaos of the outside world. Amara sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap, fingers clutching her scarf as though it were her last possession. She dared not look at Damien too often, afraid he might suddenly change his mind, send her back into the cold night, back into the arms of uncertainty. But every time she stole a glance, she saw the calm strength on his face, the assurance in his silence. He was a man who spoke without purpose. When the Rolls-Royce finally pulled into the gated compound of the tall, glass-walled residence, Amara's breath caught. She had never seen such a place except in magazines discarded at the market stalls. The gates opened as though recognizing their master, and the car slid into a courtyard where fountains danced under soft lights. It was another world, untouched by the struggles of people like her. The driver opened the door, and Amara hesitated before stepping out. Her bare feet on the polished tiles felt almost like sacrilege. Damien noticed her hesitation. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "No one here will harm you." She nodded quickly, keeping her eyes down as she followed him inside. The house was breathtaking. A grand staircase wound upward like a ribbon of marble. Paintings adorned the walls, the kind she'd only seen in history books. Everything smelled of wealth, polished wood, fresh lilies in crystal vases, the faint musk of leather and rare wine. Yet despite the grandeur, there was warmth in the atmosphere, a strange sense of quiet that soothed her. A woman in her 40s approached them, dressed elegantly but with a kind face. "Sir, you're back early," she said before her eyes fell on Amara. She studied her for a moment, and then, without question, turned toward Amara with a smile. "You must be hungry. Come, child, let me prepare something for you." Amara blinked in surprise at the kindness. She wasn't used to strangers treating her like more than a servant. Damien simply gave a small nod, and the woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Kemi, the housekeeper, guided Amara toward the kitchen. As soon as the aroma of freshly cooked food filled her senses, her stomach growled loudly, and she flushed with embarrassment. Mrs. Kemi chuckled softly and placed a plate of rice and stew in front of her. Amara muttered a quiet "thank you" before eating slowly, though every bite tasted like heaven compared to the scraps she'd been surviving on. Meanwhile, Damien watched in the corner of the room, saying nothing, but Amara could feel his gaze, measuring her, studying the way she held herself, the way she tried to master pain even in the comfort of a safe space. When she finished, he finally spoke again. "Amara, do you have any family?" Her spoon froze halfway to her lips. She shook her head slowly. "No one. My mother died years ago, and I never knew my father. I've been on my own ever since." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Damien's eyes softened for a brief moment, as though he understood the loneliness that lingered in her words. Then he leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but deliberate. "You don't belong on the streets, accused of crimes you never committed. I cannot undo what was done to you tonight, but I can offer you something else. A chance." Her heart thudded. "A chance!" she repeated cautiously. Yes, he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making life-changing decisions. You seem resilient, intelligent, and far too young to have your spirit crushed by cruelty. If you are willing, I will see to it that you are educated, given opportunities to grow, to stand on your own feet. But I need to know if you are ready to fight for yourself, Amara, because no matter how much I help, it will mean nothing if you don't believe you deserve more than what life has given you so far. His words cut straight through her, piercing the shell of despair that had wrapped around her heart. She lowered her eyes, her hands trembling. For so long she had believed the lies, that she was small, powerless, replaceable. But here was a man who saw something more, who spoke as though her life mattered. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to continue. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Damien leaned forward, his voice firm, unyielding. Strength is not something you wait to feel. It is something you decide to claim. Do you want to remain the girl who was thrown out in disgrace? Or do you want to become the woman who proves them all wrong? Amara's chest rose and fell with the force of his words. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, and though tears shimmered in her eyes, there was a spark in them now, faint but alive. I want to prove them wrong, she whispered. A faint smile curved Damien's lips, and he nodded. Good. Then tomorrow your new life begins. That night, Amara was shown to a guest room, larger than any space she had ever called her own. The bed was soft, the sheets clean and scented with lavender. As she lay under the covers, staring at the high ceiling, her mind spun in disbelief. Only hours ago she'd been abandoned in the cold, a maid with nothing, unwanted and disgraced. Now she was in the home of a man whose wealth and influence stretched across the country. She felt as though she were dreaming, and yet her pounding heart reminded her this was real. Sleep did not come easily. She thought of the mistress who had humiliated her, of the way the other maids had turned their eyes away. She thought of her mother's gentle voice, reminding her always that even in the darkest storms, a ray of light would appear. Perhaps this was her ray of light. The following morning, sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming her skin. A set of simple but beautiful clothes had been laid out for her, along with a note in Mrs. Kemmy's handwriting. Asterisk, you are safe here. Trust yourself. Asterisk. She dressed slowly, smoothing the fabric against her skin. For the first time, she saw herself in a mirror not as a servant, but as a young woman with possibility. She descended the stairs nervously, where Damien was already seated at a long dining table, sipping coffee. He gestured for her to sit. I have arranged for a tutor to begin working with you, he said, without preamble. You will learn English properly, mathematics, and business. It won't be easy, Amara, but if you commit yourself in a few years, you will stand tall, not as someone rescued, but as someone rebuilt. She swallowed hard, overwhelmed. Why? Why are you doing this for me? Damien paused, his eyes distant for a moment, as though remembering something painful. Then he said softly, because once, many years ago, I was not much different from you. Someone gave me a chance, and it changed everything. Now it is my turn to pass it on. His words left her speechless, her chest heavy with gratitude she could not yet put into words. All she could do was nod, silently promising herself that she would not waste the chance he was giving her. Days turned into weeks. Amara's lessons began, and though at first she struggled, she quickly revealed a sharp mind, a determination that surprised even herself. Damien would sometimes watch her from a distance, observing the way she poured herself into learning, her hunger for knowledge mirroring the hunger she had once endured for food. And though he never said it aloud, he felt a quiet pride in the strength she was beginning to show. But beyond the walls of Damien's mansion, whispers began to stir. Word of the maid cast out of the Amati mansion and mysteriously taken in by the billionaire reached ears eager for gossip. The mistress who had thrown her out seethed with indignation when she learned that Amara had found not just shelter, but opportunity in the arms of someone so powerful. And Amara, still unaware of the storm brewing beyond the safety of her new life, continued to rise, step by step, toward a destiny that neither she nor those who had scorned her could have ever imagined. Years passed, and Amara's journey unfolded like a story no one could have predicted. The timid maid who once clutched a worn scarf beneath a dying streetlight was no longer the girl defined by shame and false accusations. She grew with each passing day, sharpening her mind, polishing her speech, and carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen both the depths of despair and the heights of hope. Her transformation was not sudden. It was slow, difficult, and demanding. Nights of studying until her eyes ached, mornings filled with doubt, and countless moments where she had to remind herself she was worthy of the chance Damien had given her. But within her heart was a fire, one that no humiliation or rejection could ever extinguish again. Damien remained her mentor, a silent guardian who challenged her when she faltered and lifted her when she doubted. He never coddled her, for he knew her strength was not to be protected, but to be forged. She grew into the kind of woman who did not simply carry her pain, but transformed it into power. Soon, she was not only fluent in English, but could speak with eloquence and conviction. Numbers that once confused her became tools she could bend to her will. Business meetings that would have silenced her years ago now became arenas where she spoke with clarity and vision. Her rise began within Damien's enterprises, where she started as an assistant, learning the intricacies of trade, negotiation, and management. Many looked at her with skepticism in the beginning, whispering that she was only there because Damien had taken pity on her. But those whispers began to fade as Amara proved herself again and again, outshining seasoned executives with her dedication and her unshakable will. Where others sought only profit, she brought compassion, seeing the faces of people behind every number, every project, every decision. It was this quality, her ability to merge strength with empathy, that soon made her indispensable. But as her star began to rise, the past refused to stay silent. The mistress of the Amadi mansion, the very woman who had thrown her into the streets, began to hear Amara's name in circles of influence she herself longed to enter. At first, she dismissed it with arrogance. That girl was a thief, she scoffed. Her place is in the dirt, not among the elite. Yet, as invitations to prestigious events arrived for Amara, and not for her, as news outlets wrote articles praising the young woman who had risen from nothing to power, bitterness began to gnaw at her heart. The day Amara stood on a stage, addressing a hall filled with leaders, entrepreneurs, and dignitaries, was a day her past finally came face to face with her present. The event was grand, broadcast on national television, the kind of gathering where futures were shaped and reputations cemented. Amara, dressed in a flowing gown that spoke of elegance without excess, stood tall, her voice carrying through the room with confidence. She spoke of resilience, of the countless men and women in society discarded as worthless, unseen, unheard, and unloved. She spoke of the cruelty of being defined by lies, and the strength it took to rise beyond them. Every word struck her audience like a bell, resonating deeply, for she was not merely speaking theory. She was speaking her life. Among the crowd sat the Amadi mistress, her face pale, her pride in tatters. She could no longer dismiss Amara as a maid or a thief, for the truth stood before her, radiant and undeniable. Every syllable Amara uttered was a reminder of the injustice she had inflicted. The other guests, unaware of their shared history, applauded Amara with admiration, but the mistress clapped with trembling hands, consumed by shame she could never undo. After the speech, when the hall emptied into the glow of cameras and conversations, the mistress approached Amara, her steps hesitant, her mask of arrogance cracked. Amara turned, her eyes locking on the very face that had once spat venom and sent her into the cold. The years had aged the woman, yet Amara saw not power in her now, but fragility. Amara, the mistress began, her voice softer than Amara had ever heard. I wronged you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I must say it. I accuse you unjustly. I destroyed your life that night. For a moment, the memories surged, the humiliation, the tears, the loneliness. Amara could have let her bitterness rise, could have struck the woman with words as cruel as the ones once thrown at her. But as silence stretched between them, she only drew a deep breath and said, "You didn't destroy my life. You redirected it. If not for that night, I would not be the woman standing here today." The mistress's eyes widened, filling with tears that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with regret. Amara did not embrace her, nor did she scorn her. She simply turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving the woman with the weight of her own conscience. For true power was not revenge. It was the ability to rise so high that the chains of the past could no longer touch her. As the years unfolded, Amara became more than a businesswoman. She became a voice for the forgotten. Schools were built under her guidance. Scholarships granted to children who might otherwise have been trapped in the cycle of poverty she had known too well. Shelters opened for maids, laborers, and the voiceless poor who were often discarded by the rich households they served. Each project bore not just her name, but her spirit, the determination that no one should ever again feel worthless because of where they came from. Damien watched her with pride, though his own health began to decline with age. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting golden light into his study, he sat with Amara, now no longer a frightened girl, but a woman of strength and grace. "You've become everything I hoped you would be," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and weariness. Amara smiled softly, her hand resting on his. "I could never have done it without you." He shook his head. "No, Amara, the truth is, you were always capable. I merely opened a door. You were the one who walked through it, step by step, even when it hurt. That is what makes you extraordinary." Tears welled in her eyes, for she knew his time was nearing its end. But his words would never fade, for they had become the foundation of her soul. She vowed that day not only to carry forward his legacy, but to create her own, a legacy not of wealth alone, but of hope. And so, the maid once thrown out in disgrace became a name etched in history. From the ashes of humiliation, she rose into a phoenix of resilience, a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. Children across the land would one day hear her story, not as a tale of pity, but as a testament to strength. Leaders would cite her as proof that the human spirit, when given a chance, could rise beyond the most crushing of circumstances. She became not just Amara, the girl who had once been broken, but Amara, the woman who rebuilt herself brick by brick, with the hands of perseverance and the heart of compassion. And though the world marveled at her, she never forgot the night she sat under that flickering streetlight, hungry, cold, and lost. For it was in that moment of despair that her true journey began, and it was through that journey that she learned the greatest truth of all. Greatness is not given by circumstance, but forged in the fire of suffering, refined by courage and crowned with compassion. The story of Amara lived on, not as a fairy tale, but as a living proof that destiny bends in the hands of those who refuse to surrender. And as the world celebrated her triumph, she stood as a shining reminder that sometimes the very stones meant to break us become the foundation upon which we rise to unimaginable heights. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check Imper.